show you how to build a GUI in Python, and the GUI will end up creating will look something like this. It'll have user details, and when I click onto a button, some text will appear. It'll appear down here. So if I click onto this, we've got Steve Jobs, 123 Silicon Lane, Santa Monica. If you click onto status, it'll do that. So that's what it'll do. I'll get you to build a GUI today just with one button, not two buttons. So let me explain what a GUI is. A GUI is a graphical user interface. So it's graphical, and in other words, people can actually see it. The user is the person who uses it, and the interface is how the person actually uses it. So it uses buttons. It can have, you know how to use this. You'll look at your phones. You can enter text in. So it's an easy way for the user to do something where they're having to use Python itself. So they just can click onto this interface. Okay, so how do we start doing this? How do we start building a GUI? So I'm just going to shut this window down now. And I'm going to explain some of the code. Now, this bit of code here, it's sort of like the head section of the code. It sets the GUI up. It tells Python, hey, we're about to create this thing called a GUI. We're going to use this thing called ttinker. That's just a whole library of code that's getting ready. Root is the base root of the window. It's the base name of the window. And here is whether we can resize it. Don't worry about that too much for now. And what this does, it displays what the title is. So this one I'm going to say display strings. And that's it. So if I run that now, you'll see that I have now created just this, just a little window with nothing in it. So it's not much use to us at the moment. What we're going to do is we're going to put a title in now. So I've got this already set up in another window, and I'll put it in here. I'll run through what it is. Okay. Now, let's get some terminology under the way. So if I want to actually display some text, I need a thing called a label. And here I've created a name for this label. I've got LBL, which in other words is label, short for label, title, because this will be where the title is. And I've called it label. Remember the base window name is called root. Now text is what's going to be displayed. So I've got user details. I've got the font size here. I want it to be quite big, and it's going to be 28. So all this line of code does is it creates for me a label, a box where I can put some text into. Then later on I've said, well, I want to put this box in a grid, and I want to think about it, a table, row 0, column 0. Now, when we build a GUI using a method called a grid method, which is just what we're doing here, we can use rows and columns. And you'll notice something a bit strange. The first row is actually called row 0, going that way, and the first column is called column 0, not column 1. So in a lot of computer languages, the first row or the first column is actually labelled 0, not 1. Then I've got some padding. In other words, it's a bit like cascading style sheets. We can add a bit of buffering and a bit of padding, and that's what we'll do now. So you'll see what should come up. It should say user details, and it'll be quite large. So if now I save this, I run it now, and this is what we've got now. So we've got user details. Now the user can't actually do anything now. Anyone who wants to use this program, all they'll see is this. Okay, so the next step is we wanted to add that button. I want to add a button here that'll actually display something. So how do I do that? Well, I'll need to use what we call another widget. So these things, labels, buttons, entry boxes, sliders, are all called widgets. So I'm going to add another widget here with code. Now, this one, you'll notice it's a button. And what am I going to label it? I'm going to like BTN, so in other words button. That's short for button. And it's going to be a submit button. So it tells me a meaningful name, what I'm going to call it, I'm going to label it submit button. And then basically I've called, and so it's root here. Now the text, what's going to be displayed in the button will be address. I'm going to display someone's address, and I've got the font size a bit smaller. I've got a background color here, and later on I'm going to show you I've got a command function, so I'm going to disable that for the time being, or put it back in later on. That'll call a function. The function doesn't exist anymore, but we'll see what happens. So if I save that now again, what I'll do is I'll put this button into row 1, so it'll actually appear right down here, right down there, and it'll be in column 0, so it'll appear right under here, and it's going to be on the west hand side, so it's going to appear just there. Let's see what happens. Okay, there you go. So now I've actually got a button. You click on it, you'll actually see that the button will actually, you can press it, it changes colour. Nothing else happens though, because we haven't actually told the computer to do anything else. So now I want another label that will actually display some details of the user. So I have to create another widget. And I'll put another bunch of code in. Okay. Now we've got another label. And I've called this one output because we're going to output the name. We're going to output a name. It's going to be another label box. In other words, it'll display text. Now I haven't got anything texted now. It's just blank at the top for the moment. And I've got font size and Arial 14. I've got output, name, grid. So it's going to appear right under here. And again, you'll see that that's row 0 now for that text label here. This is row 1. Appear straight under here. That's what a button is. And row 2 will be where the text will be starting to display. So it'll be under here. I haven't got anything in here. Just to make sure you can see it's working, I'm just going to write the word test in here, just to see if that text will come up. Okay, there it is. So, user details, address, and test. So far it's working. We've got a GUI that'll display that. But what we want to happen is when we click on the address, something should change. That text should change, and that's what we're going to do now. To do this, we need to do something a bit different. And I'm going to now create a function. What a function will do is that when I click on the button, it'll call a function, and when the function is actually called, it'll actually execute some code which will produce some text. And let's have a look how I've done that. So I'll do this, and I'll cut and paste this. Here it is. Now I always put the functions in here. And there it is. There's my function. You'll notice when I hit return, it doesn't go all the way to the end, it's indented slightly. So when we do a function in Python, or we do an if statement or a while statement, it's all, the next line of code is always indented 4 spaces. So what I want to do in this function? Well, I want to output some text. I'll show you how we do this. Oh, before I do this, I always do one thing. No, I'll do this. So I'm going to output some text. It's going to say output name. Now you notice here that it's output name here. Configure means it will change. Think about configuring a hard drive in a computer. It will change. What will it change? It will change the text. So whatever we've got here, we've got test at the moment. It's going to override that. It's going to configure it, and it's going to say Steve Jobs instead of test. That's what it will do. Now at the moment, it won't actually do anything because we haven't actually called that function. So if I run this now, Even though we've got configure text, because I haven't actually called the function, it's sitting there, it's waiting to be called, but it's not doing anything because we haven't actually called it. So how do I call the function? Well, I have to write this line of code. Command equals. Now, the actual function is called display status. So all I need to write here is display, exactly how I've written, status. And I save that. Now, when I run it, I'll have the user details. Now we hit the address button, it should change. It should, when I hit the address button here, this button here, because it has a display it says command display status, the code will jump up to where that function is, and it'll execute the function. So it'll execute output dot configure. In other words, can change the output label, change that box, and change the text in the box to Steve Jobs. And it does that. And that's how we can change the output of a GUI based on a user's response. Now, Steve Jobs, it doesn't really say much at the moment. I'd like to put a couple more lines of code in. So what we can do is I'll actually put a couple more labels in here. So I will show you what I've done. I'm going to create 2 more output labels. So in other words, I can output 2 more text boxes. So one says output street. You'll notice it's a label, and it's row 3, so it's going to go directly under Steve Jobs, which is row 2. It's blank text at the moment, but if I wanted to, just to see it's working, I could write street here. And then I've got output city as the next label. I've got grid, and that's in row 4. And I'm going to write just city. Now if I save that now, you'll see it's actually changed. Alright, so now we've got test, street and city. So you see that the text box is there. If I go change, only that first line will change to Steve Jobs. Now, change the rest of it. I'll explain. Alright, now see that text is indented. We've got to make sure it's all lined up. So now I've got output configure street. So output street.configure. So output street, which is this label here, it's going to change the text to user has moved to a new platform. And that's not what I wanted. I wanted something a bit different to that. Sorry about that. I'll put this one. No, so I've got 123 Silicon Lane, and then I've got the city name as well. So it's got the city label will change to text equals Santa Monica. So let's see if it all works. So what should happen is when I click on the button, we should change the text here to Steve Jobs. It should change the text in the next row down to 123 Silicon Lane, and the next row down, it should change the lane to Santa Monica, California. Here we go, and it's working. So when we click onto it, it changes. So that's how we've done it. So if you click onto the button, that'll change. Now it'll stay changed unless we write some more code to refresh it or to make it blank. So just I'm going to go over this again, just a couple of things, because you've learned a lot. It's been a big lesson. So the first thing is this section up the top. Think about this being like the head section of the code. It just tells Python that we're going to create a GUI. It basically says what the base name of the window is. We have the title, if that's what gets displayed. So it says, this one says display strings. We have then built our basic GUI, and this basic GUI has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows. The first row in a GUI is always called row equals 0. No, that'll be hard to get your head around. So the first one, we display a title, so which is a label. If we display text, it's a label. Then we display a button, which is the next row down. Then we have, we're going to display someone's name after we click the button. Then we're going to display the street, their address. Then we're going to display their city that they're in. And so we go row 1, 2, 3, and 4 to do that. That's basically, I'll explain later on what all this stuff does. This is basically just to give it a bit of padding in order to space the letters out a bit. That gets a bit involved, but for the time being, if we can do this at this stage, you'll be doing really well. So, good luck with it. The last thing I want to explain is this. Really, really important, I haven't explained this. A GUI is a loop. So in other words, we keep on looping around and around and around. So we need to make sure we finish the loop here. So the syntax is root dot main loop open and close brackets. So that ends the loop. And this ends the tutorial.